And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
We do turn now to that huge car shortage fueled by a chip shortage. General Motors temporarily shutting down more than half of its plants in North America.
General Motors plans to close its plant in Lordstown, Ohio. Thousands of workers there make the Chevy Cruze.
And it's just one of several plants that GM plans to close in the coming months.
In a matter of months, a single policy strike from Washington has turned General Motors into the living proof of how costly protecting American jobs can truly become. What was once projected as a year of steady growth suddenly collapsed under the weight of tariffs. GM itself admitted that duties are set to wipe out between $4 and $5 billion of earnings in 2025, nearly one-third of its expected profit. The numbers tell a brutal story. In the second quarter alone, net income plunged 35% with tariffs alone devouring more than $1.1 billion. Investors reacted instantly. GM stock shed almost 7% on the day of the announcement, closing at $4,959 and sparking alarm across Wall Street. But this is no longer just a quarterly Wall Street panic, $1.1 billion quarterly loss setback. Analysts are already warning of a darker horizon, a shadow hanging over the entire North American auto industry. The question practically writes itself: if America's largest automaker can be shaken this hard, what chance do smaller players have in the battles to come? Before we dive in, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters and helps us reach more people following this unfolding crisis. And the fallout didn't stop with Wall Street's panic. What began as a blow to balance sheets quickly bled into the factory floor. The assembly lines that once roared with steel, oil, and sweat now echo with silence. In Detroit, GM's Factory Zero, once hailed as the symbol of America's electric future, was forced to shut down production on April 11th, instantly leaving 200 workers without jobs. Across the border in Ontario, the Ingersoll plant sent 200 employees home on extended leave. Their return date pushed as far as October. And in Oshawa, the night shift was cut entirely with 700 workers dismissed indefinitely. Each closure isn't just a number, it's a story of families staring at uncertain paychecks and towns watching their economic lifelines snap. Experts now warn that if the trend continues, the North American auto sector could hemorrhage as many as 50,000 jobs. That is not simply a statistic but the equivalent of entire communities either subscribing. It's how we keep uncovering what others won't say. But shuttered plants were only the beginning. The shock soon reached the very people those tariffs were supposed to protect: American car buyers. What was once sold as the promise of American cars for American families has morphed into something far more painful: swollen invoices that no household budget anticipated. Each pickup truck rolling Detroit and Ontario factories shut down off the line now costs roughly $3, $200 more to build, and GM has little choice but to pass that burden directly to customers. The squeeze is even tighter for electric vehicles. Washington's new tariff regime came hand-in-hand with the scrapping of the $7,500 tax credit that once made EVs accessible to middle-class buyers. The result is stark. For families who dreamed of driving an American-made vehicle, the choice is no longer about horsepower or design. It is about survival. Either pay thousands more upfront or abandon the dream of owning a made-in-America car altogether. And if higher prices pushed buyers away, the consequences for GM's most ambitious gamble were even more severe. The company's vision of leading the electric revolution, built around its much-publicized Ultium platform, now finds itself stranded in the middle of the road. Yes, EV sales in the second quarter doubled compared to last year, but growth on paper hides a harsher reality. GM needs to deliver at least 100,000 Ultium vehicles annually just to break even. Projections for 2025 suggest barely 65,000 will be sold, leaving a multi-billion-dollar investment bleeding cash with no immediate path to profitability. The blow is compounded by politics. Federal support for charging infrastructure has been frozen, choking off the very ecosystem that would have sustained an electric future. Without subsidies, without a reliable charging network, even loyal customers are left asking whether the transition is worth the risk. The result is paradoxical. GM's electrification plan, once a bold statement of independence from fossil fuels and foreign rivals, now sits hostage to political crossfire. A strategy designed to carry Detroit into the next century has instead become collateral damage in today's tariff wars. And the damage didn't stop with GM's own balance sheet or its electric ambitions. Once the automaker stumbled, the entire industrial ecosystem that depends on it began to crack under the pressure. In Tennessee, Audient was forced to shutter 2 plants, erasing 400 jobs overnight. Across Michigan and Indiana, smaller suppliers trimmed another 900 positions. The kind of cuts that never make headlines but devastate the families who rely on them. Even the local diner across from a Michigan plant reported consumers hit with soaring car prices, losing half its regular customers within weeks. Proof that the pain spreads far beyond factory gates. The ripple reached global players too. Volvo, calculating the impact of soaring input costs, warned it would have to furlough 000 workers after the price of producing a single truck jumped from $165,000 to $180,000. That kind of leap is not an inconvenience. It is an existential threat. What emerges is a pattern. Every tariff-induced shock at GM cascades outward, stripping jobs from suppliers, draining foot traffic from small businesses, and unsettling multinationals that once saw North America as a safe bet. This is no longer just GM's crisis. It is a regional breakdown with no easy escape route. The shockwave soon leapt from factory floors into the halls of politics, where tariffs became less a tool of strategy and more a bomb dividing allies, unions, and governments. What was meant to unify under the banner of America first instead revealed deep fractures and exposed long-standing tensions about who really benefits from protectionism. President Trump doubled down, imposing a 25% tariff and brushing aside GM's protest with a sharp rebuke. GM brought this on themselves. For his supporters, the words carried the weight of conviction proof that he was unafraid to challenge even the nation's largest automaker. But for critics, it was something else entirely. A reckless gamble that ignored decades of industrial interdependence and dismissed the livelihoods of thousands as collateral damage. Union leaders themselves split along the fault lines. Sean Fein, president of the United Auto Workers, hailed the tariffs as a long overdue measure to prioritize American labor over foreign imports, framing the move as a shield against a tide of outsourcing. Yet across the border, Lana Payne, leader of Canada's Unifor, lashed out, accusing GM of sacrificing Canadian livelihoods just to score political points in Washington. For her, the tariffs weren't a shield. They were a sword cutting into communities already stretched thin. The divide didn't stop there. Lawmakers in Washington sparred over whether tariffs represented patriotism or self-sabotage. Governors of auto-dependent states warned of collapsing tax bases, while trade hawks in Congress applauded the return of hardline policies. Each press conference, each soundbite deepened the sense of disarray. Meanwhile, workers caught in the middle heard the speeches, but saw no change in their daily lives. In Detroit, Oshawa and Ingersoll factories stayed dark. Paychecks remained uncertain and neighborhoods quietly unraveled. For them, the debate was not about ideology or political theater. It was about whether their children would still have a future in towns built on the promise of the auto industry. The divide in politics was mirrored on the ground, where entire regions built on cars found themselves fighting for survival. Detroit, once the beating heart of American industry, is now watching wave after wave of workers pack up and leave. Each departure weakens not only the factories but the very fabric of the city, draining tax bases, hollowing schools, and shuttering local businesses. Streets that once pulsed with factory shifts now carry the quiet weight of uncertainty, lined with for sale signs and abandoned storefronts. Across the border, Ontario, long branded the assembly line of North America, is confronting a similar paralysis. Plants that once operated around the clock now sit idle, their parking lots half empty, their supply chains in limbo. In towns like Windsor and Oshawa, where generations grew up with steady paychecks from assembly plants, residents now confront a future where the next generation may never set foot on the factory floor. What was once a competitive advantage, cross-border integration has become a choke point. Strangled by the very policies designed to defend American jobs, the ripple effect lands hardest on those least equipped to weather it. Cafes that once served shift workers now operate at half capacity. Trucking firms face delayed contracts, and service providers across the region watch their customer base evaporate. Local governments, suddenly starved of revenue, cut back on community programs, leaving libraries, sports suppliers, and local businesses, crack leagues, and public transit in jeopardy. What was once a resilient ecosystem now resembles a fragile glass pane splintering with each additional shock. For decades, the US-Canada Auto Corridor symbolized efficiency and trust, a partnership that gave North America an edge over Europe and Asia. It wasn't just about cars, it was about identity, about the belief that Detroit and Toronto together could build something bigger than the sum of their parts. Today, that bond is being undone, squeezed by an America First doctrine that forgets the continent itself is an interconnected machine, and when one gear seizes, the entire engine grinds to a halt. In the end, this shock is not confined to GM or even Detroit. It raises an uncomfortable question about the entire foundation of American industry in an era of globalization. Once tariffs morph into barriers, capital and production begin searching for safer harbors. Already, investors whisper about moving assembly and R&D out of North America toward regions where policy is steadier and costs are predictable. The global auto market is shifting. Europe and Asia, with their lower volatility and stronger integration, are poised to absorb what America loses. For decades, Detroit's slogan was clear: American cars for the world. But that promise is fading. In its place looms a reversal: the world's cars replacing America. If these policies continue, GM's $5 billion loss will look less like an isolated tragedy and more like the opening act of a broader collapse. The real risk is not just a wounded balance sheet, but the erosion of the industrial strength that once defined the United States. So here's the question that lingers. Is this the price America is willing to pay for short-term political victories? Or are we watching the slow unraveling of a century-old legacy that cannot be rebuilt once it's gone? Thanks for watching, and if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click fuels the truth.